The collapse of Bashar al-Assad's regime, a turning point in Middle Eastern history. The situation in Syria has reached a boiling point, with the collapse of Bashar al-Assad's regime marking one of the most significant geopolitical events in recent memory. After more than 20 years in power, Assad's government has crumbled under the weight of escalating internal dissent, economic turmoil, and sustained military pressure from rebel forces. In a dramatic turn of events, it has been confirmed that Assad and his immediate family have fled Syria and are now under Russian protection. According to reports from the Kremlin, they were granted asylum on humanitarian grounds. This announcement signals the end of a brutal dictatorship that oversaw years of war, repression, and widespread suffering in Syria. In today's video, we'll unpack the rapid chain of events that led to Assad's downfall, analyze the power dynamics now shaping Syria's future, and explore the broader implications for the Middle East and the world. Bashar al-Assad's flight to Russia. Bashar al-Assad's escape to Russia marks the final chapter of his regime's collapse. For over a decade, Assad clung to power despite facing enormous opposition. His government survived the early waves of the Arab Spring in 2011, crushed internal dissent with brutal military campaigns, and leaned heavily on Russian and Iranian support to withstand years of civil war. However, recent developments proved too much for the regime to handle. A combination of economic collapse, international sanctions, and mounting military defeats at the hands of rebel forces pushed the regime into a corner. By early last week, it became clear that Assad could no longer hold on. In the dead of night, he and his family boarded a private plane bound for Russia, leaving Syria to descend further into turmoil. Russia's decision to grant Assad asylum is a strategic move. While Moscow may have lost its primary ally in the region, it likely hopes to preserve some degree of influence in Syria by acting as a mediator in the country's next chapter. However, the Kremlin's position is far from secure, and its foothold in Syria is now more vulnerable than ever. The geopolitical fallout of Assad's collapse. Russia's loss of influence. Russia's intervention in Syria is a cornerstone of its broader strategy to expand its influence in the Middle East. Beginning in 2015, Moscow provided military support to Assad's regime, deploying troops, aircraft, and advanced weaponry to turn the tide of the civil war in Assad's favor. This intervention not only bolstered Assad, but also allowed Russia to establish critical military bases, such as the air base in Hmeimim and the naval base in Tartus. These bases were key to Russia's strategy, enabling it to project power into the Mediterranean and challenge NATO's dominance in the region. However, with Assad's regime now in ruins, Russia faces the prospect of losing these strategic assets. While Moscow claims it will continue to play a role in Syria, its ability to do so has been severely weakened. The Kremlin is already stretched thin by its ongoing war in Ukraine, and its resources are insufficient to maintain a dominant presence in Syria. Meanwhile, rival powers like Turkey, Israel, and the United States are poised to capitalize on Russia's diminished role. Israel's strategic calculations. Israel has been closely monitoring the chaos unfolding in Syria, and its recent military actions reflect a calculated effort to secure its interests. Israeli tanks have crossed the southern border into Syria, advancing into territories near the Golan Heights. Simultaneously, Israeli airstrikes have targeted military facilities and intelligence centers in Damascus. For years, Israel has viewed Syria as a potential security threat, particularly due to the presence of Iranian forces and Hezbollah operatives within Syrian territory. The collapse of Assad's regime presents both opportunities and risks for Israel. On one hand, the removal of a hostile regime weakens Iran's influence in the region. On the other hand, the ensuing instability could create a breeding ground for extremist groups. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recently addressed the situation, emphasizing that Israel's actions are aimed at protecting its borders and preventing hostile forces from taking advantage of the chaos in Syria. The collapse of the Assad regime creates a volatile situation on our northern border. We cannot allow terrorist groups or Iranian-backed militias to exploit this instability. The IDF will act decisively to ensure Israel's security and to prevent any threats from materializing. Netanyahu's remarks highlight the delicate balancing act Israel must perform as it navigates the fallout from Assad's downfall. The humanitarian crisis. The collapse of Assad's regime has exacerbated an already dire humanitarian crisis. Over 14 million Syrians have been displaced since the start of the war, and millions remain dependent on international aid. The power vacuum has disrupted supply chains, leaving many without access to food, water, or medical care. Humanitarian organizations are warning of a potential catastrophe if the international community does not step up its efforts. What led to the collapse? 1. Economic meltdown. Syria's economy had been deteriorating for years, but the situation reached a breaking point in 2023. Hyperinflation, currency devaluation, and skyrocketing unemployment devastated ordinary Syrians. Basic goods became unaffordable, and electricity outages plagued major cities. Sanctions imposed by the United States and the European Union further crippled the regime's ability to sustain itself. 2. Military defeats. Rebel groups, emboldened by recent victories and increased foreign backing, launched coordinated offensives across multiple fronts. Key cities and strategic military installations fell to opposition forces, leaving the regime unable to maintain its grip on power. 3. Internal divisions. As the regime's fortunes waned, internal fissures began to surface. High-ranking military officials defected, taking valuable intelligence and resources with them. Reports also indicate growing resentment among Assad's Alawite base, which had long been the backbone of his regime. 4. Erosion of Russian and Iranian support. While Russia and Iran provided crucial support to Assad for years, both countries have faced their own challenges. Russia, bogged down in its war in Ukraine, has had fewer resources to dedicate to Syria. Iran, grappling with internal unrest and international sanctions, has also scaled back its support. The road ahead. What comes next? Syria's future is uncertain, but several scenarios are emerging. Fragmentation. The country could splinter into zones controlled by different factions, with no single authority able to unite Syria. Rebel consolidation. Rebel groups like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham (HTS) could seize the opportunity to establish dominance, though their extremist roots may hinder international recognition. International mediation. The United Nations and other international bodies may push for a transitional government, but achieving consensus among Syria's warring factions will be a monumental challenge. The fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime marks a turning point for Syria and the Middle East. It is both an opportunity for renewal and a risk of deeper chaos. How the world responds in the coming weeks and months will shape not only Syria's future, but also the balance of power in the region. Stay tuned for more in-depth analysis as this crisis continues to unfold.